Yeah, so I said basically many people thought that Iran would win, but not everyone did. And outside of Iran, no one did apparently. I mean, most people didn't. So um, Iranians all have, the collective nation has more confidence in its capabilities now. So they're not fearful of war in the way that, let's say, some were 4 months ago. Some people in Iran thought a war with the United States would lead to defeat. Not everyone, as I said, a segment of you, but that segment has now been convinced of Iran's power. So Iran is more powerful today. It's more prepared. The economy is worse off, but the military is more prepared. So, and the Americans are not in a good position because it will take a very, very long time to make up for the huge shortages that exist in the world today because of the war. And right now, as we speak, those shortages are not being compensated for. The amount of ships leaving the Strait of Hormuz is not nearly enough. So the Iranians are in a strong position to deal with terrorist groups from abroad, terrorist groups in the country. There may be attempts to do things in Tehran during the funeral. They're talking about people not bringing their children to the funeral. They're saying don't bring backpacks. They're saying, they're preparing people just to make sure that these ISIS, Al Qaeda suicide bombers of Western intelligence agencies and the Israelis don't carry out anything, some mass attack. So they are much more prepared in general now to confront these things than they were months ago.
Yeah. I think the war has been a very different experience for Iranian people. Not only Iranian people, for Iranian military are attached together with IRGC, because Iran, even during the war with Iraq, Iraq didn't have that much of air power, navy to attack Iran. This was something different for Iran, a new experience. And coming out of this war, somehow putting I would say it's not in a permanent end, but coming out of this war and having MOU, it means that Iran has learned a lot during the war. And recently we've learned that Iran is improving the air defense system in the southern part of Iran. And what was when you look at the military aspect of what has happened and the way that IRGC or army is talking about, what is their understanding before this war started and right now? How confident they are right now compared to what it was before?
The armed forces collectively are stronger today, much stronger today, I would say, in confronting any new conflict. Not only because they have they've replaced they brought in new missiles and new drones and instead of the old drones and old missiles, and they're upgrading their systems, but also with regards to tactics, with regards to shortcomings that they had to deal with their shortcomings, to improve their tactics, their strategy, and also, as you rightly pointed out, air defenses. They've learned how to uh, develop new techniques to bring down jets, to bring down drones. They've learned from their experience, and that I think is something that the Americans, I'm sure the Americans are taking very seriously, and the Iranians are going to make sure that the United States is uh, remains in a vulnerable position economically, so that if it intends to reignite a war, that immediately the Iran could bring down their economy. So unless the Americans take the MOU seriously, then they're not going to get the sort of relief that economic relief that they're seeking. The Iranians are not naive; they're not childish. Again, I'm not saying the MOU is a great thing. I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. I think that there are certain things that should have been different in the MOU, and the Iranians should not have agreed until those were met. But I don't think the MOU was a catastrophe unless the Iranians implemented their side of the bargain and the Americans didn't. If the Iranians had opened the Strait of Hormuz and the Americans behaved as they're behaving now, yes, that would have been catastrophic. But the Iranians knew that the Americans were going to lie. They knew that the Americans were going to cheat. They knew that the Americans were going to steal. So that's why in the agreement, the Iranians will continue to be in control of the Strait of Hormuz. Why did they say? They didn't say, the agreement does not say the Strait of Hormuz will be open. That's not what it says. It says that Iran will manage it. Why? Because Iran knew that the United States would lie about Lebanon, that the United States would lie about Iranian assets, that the United States would lie about threatening Iran, that the United States would lie about violating the ceasefire, and that the United States would lie with regards to removing the sanctions, and the United States would quite possibly lie about, in future, about lifting the siege.
I think one of the aspects that is much more important than the military aspect of the war on Iranian people is the psychological sort of change that has somehow transferred the Iranian mindset so far. Because before the war started, they said the United States came out every time, I'm going to bomb you, leave Tehran, and you have to capitulate, do this and that. That was a huge sort of pressure on Iranian society. Many people didn't know, didn't have, people like me, people like new generations, they don't have any sort of understanding of the war psychologically. So the war is coming to the Iranian people, and they see how the war has been managed by the military forces and how capable they are to respond to the American attack and Israeli attack. It was a huge attack, by the way, comparing, to two forces, and comparing the aid, the sort of help they got from GCC countries, from Europeans, based on NATO Secretary General. It was huge for Iranian people psychologically. Where they are, where are the Iranian? Let's put it this way: how do you find the Iranian people today when Donald Trump comes out and tries to intimidate Iranians? Because he continues with those tweets. It was based on MOU, but he's just violating that, but continuing, I'm going to bomb you, I'm going to destroy you, this time going to be harder.
Well, let me give you an example. And this is anecdotal, of course, but I think it's reflective of something much bigger. Before the war, when the United States was building up its forces, when I was go on campus, that's where I work, that's my only job, my colleagues would often among themselves and in conversations with me say, will there be war? And of course, many were worried about war, if not everyone. I just came back from campus an hour ago. I was on campus today. No one spoke about war. It was all about, business as usual, signing papers for the department, at a department meeting, PhD candidates, the next semester, discussing what needs to be done for next semester, the usual. No one said any, and I went again, I was there yesterday too. Sorry, not yesterday, the day before yesterday. No one asked me anything about the war. I didn't see anyone talking about the war. I'm not saying no one does, but the mood 4 or 5 months ago was different from now. That was like, it was always the center of conversation. Now there are other things they talk about, but not like will there be war like they would back then. So that fear doesn't exist. I'm not saying it's completely non-existent. They murder people, the Americans and the Israelis and these regimes in the Persian Gulf and the Europeans, all of them collaborated to murder children, to murder our leader, to murder politicians, academics, scientists, to bomb apartment blocks. As I said early once to you, that there were a number of women. Someone who lived on that street said this. There were some women working in a building. They were cooking. They as volunteers. They decided, and they were all women living in that street. They went into building. They were cooking for like the men who were on the streets and doing it at manning checkpoints. Volunteers who were manning checkpoints and anti-aircraft defenses, and so they were cooking food for them so that they